Joe Jaworski, thank you so much. You are an attorney. You used to be mayor of Galveston, and now you want to be attorney general. Why? And what are your priorities?
Well, Jack, thank you. I'm running for attorney general because it's time to restore integrity to the consequential office of the Texas Attorney General. You know, it's arguably the most important executive office, and the reason I say that is we know the governor is at the top of the ticket, but you know, the Constitution indicated that it would be a weak form of governor. We know the legislature is part-time, and the Attorney General, in contrast, is 24/7. And you have the ability to make change in the courts, which we know is pretty much where all these conflicts seem to wind up. So I maintain that above all, the Attorney General's office should be staffed with someone who is beyond reproach. And I'm sorry to say that our incumbent Attorney General is not that. That's why I'm running.
And so when you talk about integrity, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about someone who breeds confidence in youth and the elderly and everyone in between alike. Someone who you know won't embarrass you when you go to court. I mean, Jack, can you imagine if you went to court and right before you faced the judge, your attorney whispered in your ear, you know, I'm under a 3-count indictment, but don't worry about it. I mean, it makes me wonder, what do people think about Texas, really, both in the nation and abroad? So when I'm talking about integrity, I'm talking about being above reproach and breeding confidence in the electorate, because right now government seems to be failing, and I know it can do better. And I think people can make a difference.
Do you think Ken Paxton is vulnerable?
Yes, sir. Jack, I think he is vulnerable from any number of perspectives. I think he's not vulnerable in the Texas Republican primary. But I think in a general election, Democrats have clearly lost faith in his abilities, but so have a lot of Republican voters, as evidenced by the fact that he has robust competition in his own primary. So I contend from a political perspective, an electoral perspective, Democrats and moderate Republicans have something to agree upon here.
So let me ask you, because before you get to a general election, you have to go through the primary. And as you know, there are a couple other Democrats. So what is your message to Democratic primary voters on why you are the best candidate to go up against Paxton or any other Republican?
Well, first off, I think it's a good thing that we have now 3 Democrats running for Texas Attorney General. It's the first time that's happened since 1998. But I maintain to the Democratic primary voters that I'm the best choice of the 3, because number one, we want to beat Mr. Paxton in November. Now, I have 30 years of being a trial and appellate lawyer, both in federal and state court. Not all the Democratic primary candidates are licensed to practice law in Texas. I know a lot of voters will be surprised to hear that. And none of them have the number of years of experience. In fact, both my esteemed colleagues who are joining me in this primary, if you add up their years of experience, they don't match mine. Furthermore, I'm a mediator, and that means I've been listening for a long time and helping resolve intractable conflicts. Sounds like a pretty good skill set for someone in government these days. But finally, as mayor of Galveston, I actually lived the experience, and as a city councilman for 6 years before that local government is the best government. And I think that that is one of the defining conflicts right now in state government. Let Brownsville be Brownsville. Let Dallas be Dallas. Let Abilene be Abilene. But the state government won't allow it. As Attorney General, I've lived that. As mayor, I would be able to draw upon that experience. As Attorney General, I will secure local decision-making authority.
And how would you apply that? In other words, on what issues would you apply that? Because that has been, the local choice has been a very big issue for years here in Texas.
Well, it used to be a very popular conservative principle, and it still is a conservative principle because it's limited government, in other words, federalism. It's a very American aspect of government. I would apply it most specifically in the Attorney General opinion section, Jack. That's where unsettled questions of law are resolved by the Attorney General. The governor, legislators, heads of boards and superintendents and the like can ask for these legal questions to be resolved when it's unsettled in the courts. So I've told people, if it's unconstitutional, I'll say so. If it's constitutional, I'll say so. I'll call balls and strikes like you want me to. But on questions of law where there is room for interpretation, my bias, appropriately so, will be that local government matters and that these questions should be resolved in favor of cities, counties, and school boards.
As you know, there are a lot of lawsuits between the Biden administration and the state of Texas. Some suits filed by the federal government, some suits filed by the state of Texas. And so my question to you is, if you get into that position and there's still the lawsuits between the state and the federal government, how would you go about defending a state law that you do not agree with?
This is an essential question, and Ken Paxton failed the test last December when he chose Donald Trump over his own state. He actually filed a facially frivolous lawsuit in the United States Supreme Court, and now the State Bar of Texas is investigating him for violating the disciplinary rules of professional conduct. His response, doesn't matter, I'm the Attorney General. That's a really outrageous position to take. But it's important that we look deeper into the question. What is the Attorney General's role? Who is the client? Well, I'll tell you, Jack, the governor is not the Attorney General's client. The legislature is not. The people of Texas is the client, all of them. And so the Attorney General has a duty, I think, to use his, or one day her, independent judgment to analyze the question of these legal issues. Now, there is something in the disciplinary rules that requires you to make it a judgment. And if you feel like something is facially frivolous, if your client is asking you to advance a frivolous position, you have a duty of candor to tell the judge. So, for example, Senate Bill 8, the heartbeat bill, which is atrociously entitled, I would tell you right now that it is, like, obviously, facially unconstitutional under Roe versus Wade. And how Mr. Paxton allowed that law to ever leave the legislature to be signed by the governor is appalling to me. So it's going to be obviously resolved in the United States Supreme Court on a procedural motion, and ultimately substantive. It will be decided. But the Attorney General should never have let it get there.
Now, if there is another law, for example, that was passed and it's controversial, hasn't made it up to the Supreme Court, let's just say, but is nonetheless controversial, passed by the state legislature, you're saying that the legislature that passed the bill, it would not be your client? I mean, that's still the state of Texas. The legislature still represents the people. Is that what you're telling me?
You have an independent duty as the Attorney General. You certainly have seen over the last 2 decades one team on the field. And, I'm not saying they all meet, for dinner and figure out what the game plan is going to be. But frankly, they have all been on the same page politically. And I will tell you that it was always that way during much of our adult life. But it wasn't that long ago that you had George Bush as governor and Dan Morales and Bob Bullock all working together. And I think that there were bad laws perhaps proposed, but they were never passed because there was a check and a balance. So yes, I'm telling you, the Attorney General is not handcuffed to have to defend every single law. Ideally, the Attorney General will have some impact on the law as it wends its way through the legislative process. As a good general counsel of the state, he should never have let that law pass. It's obviously unconstitutional.
We've talked about the abortion law. What do you make of the situation at the border?
Well, the border needs attention, and it needs it immediately. I don't know that the federal government is doing everything that it possibly can, but what I do know is that Texas leadership is openly hostile to our federal partners. We're still part of the United States, okay? I think the Attorney General can have specific impact on this by 2 or 3 specific programs. One is to use part of the Attorney General budget, which is very generous, $1.1 billion every biennium, to fund assistant U.S. attorneys. They're called special assistant U.S. attorneys, SOUSs. Now, this is something that has been most recently done, I think, when Mr. Cornyn was Attorney General, but it's not been done for a long time. What this specifically means, Jack, is that you can use some of the AG's budget to fund lawyers that work for the federal government to fight the cartel, which is who's bringing in a lot of these unfortunate souls. You know, I don't blame people for trying to find a better life in America, but I do blame the cartel for bringing them up here and charging a hefty fee and then leaving these poor folks to suffer. I think that if we were to take it to the cartel, and I know that sounds like big talk, but let's face it, that's who's bringing drugs and illegal immigration to our border. It's not a natural thing for people to walk hundreds and thousands of miles.
I wanted to ask you about police reform because it has been an issue in the last year. Where are you on that? And how do you think the Attorney General can have an impact on that?
Well, I think people like police. They like good police. I think people are very offended by abusive police. And, we don't want to throw anything out with the bathwater, to use that metaphor. I believe, as a former mayor, funding the police is important. I think the idea that Democrats are all for defunding security and law enforcement is a complete misnomer. My understanding of the movement is that there should be ample resources applied toward mental health and alternative ways to deal with certain crisis situations. But I know, as an Attorney General and as a mayor and as a Texas voter and as a taxpayer, that security comes first. Without security, we cannot live a quality life. So I think what I would like to do, Jack, as Attorney General, is to use the bully pulpit, use the statewide office as a way to bring advocacy groups and law enforcement groups, whether they're unions or management, to the table to have an open and honest discussion. I think here is where I would rely upon my mediation skills. You have to have good responsive listening and let people have their say. Right now, it seems like in the political realm, people are talking past each other and nothing is getting solved.
Elections integrity. There's another lawsuit by the federal government against the state. Your thoughts on that?
Right. Mr. Paxton is unfortunately very proud of his voter fraud unit. And what's unfortunate about that is that the evidence he has to support the idea that such fraud exists is so minimal when you compare how many votes have been cast. 100 million votes minimum since 2004, and that's just using the November elections. I mean, forget the primaries. And all he can come up with is roughly 600 or so instances where he successfully prosecuted someone. Well, Jack, if you put that number into 100 million, the product is so annoyingly small as to be less than the bad stuff we drink in the water every night. Look, I maintain that we don't have a voter fraud problem of such a magnitude that we need to suppress the vote. I think that what we ought to do instead is increase access, because the more people feel they can vote, the better we will dilute what anecdotal fraud there may be. I think it's really election fraud is what Mr. Paxton's talking about. So I think these laws that he promotes in court and that people are promoting are really intended to just kind of keep a clubby environment as to who gets to vote. That everybody wants to vote from 18 years old on, Jack. And I would say to you that we should start when our students are 18 and make sure that they have the same zeal when it's time to cast their first vote that they do 2 years earlier when they're asking for their driver's license. That way, the basic element of American citizenship is accomplished at such a young age, and then it becomes a habit.
Two other questions on issues that are in the headlines. Vaccine mandates. Where are you on this?
Well, I believe in the science, and I was very proud to get my vaccines. I think that the legal question is the governor abusing the Disaster Act? So let me take a moment and look at this from a legal perspective. The governor has the political choice to use the Disaster Act to meet the moment. Those are the words in the preamble of the act, or not. Now, Governor Abbott at this time has decided not to embrace mandates on a statewide level. That's his call. He's the governor. But what he can't do is abuse the Disaster Act and forbid local leadership from meeting their moment. So I'm going to go back to the local question and say that if a mayor, a county judge, or a school board choose to have a mandate, I think the governor needs to get out of the way and let local government have its say. Not every city is going to be the same, not every county is going to be the same, but local decision-making authority is the end result of federalism, and I think the governor should not get in the way, and attorney general should not encourage the governor to get in their way.
And my last question to you is, where are you on legalizing marijuana for recreational use in Texas?
Firmly in support.
Why?
Well, at least three reasons. One, the money. If we tax it at the moderate Colorado rate, we'll generate $1.1 billion every biennium. That's a lot of money for infrastructure, mental health, security, whatever you want to put it toward. We also have a lot of veterans and chronic pain sufferers and cancer survivors that will benefit from nature's wellness alternative. I mean, if we can get away from pills, and more pills, Texas can finally fight a winning war against addiction. But Jack, for me, the most important reason, and I think this really touches on the Attorney General's purview, is social and criminal justice reform. I mean, I like to ask people, how much longer are we going to incarcerate young adults, and let's be fair, principally young adults of color, for possessing a flower that grows out of the ground for their personal use, so that we can put them in prisons, and all too often private prisons, so that shareholders can make a profit off their incarceration. It's bad. That's not a good society, and we're better than that. But the best part of this, Jack, is that when we remove this wasteful and petty prosecution, we will fund the police. Yeah, we'll save $300 million a year so police and prosecutors can fight real crime, cartel crime, domestic violence, human trafficking. That is indeed a winning plan for Texas.
Joe Jaworski, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jack.